Welcome to How to Navigate Going Gluten-Free, and welcome to the Brandless Life Pop-Up with a Purpose in LA. We have been here all week. We'll be here next week too. One of the things I want to remind you to do is to please be social tonight. So if you post anything from this panel, from this space, please hashtag it Brandless Life and also tag us at Brandless Life. And when you do that, we will donate 3 meals to Feeding America on your behalf. Tonight, I am here with Shireen Yates and Jackie McEwan, and we're doing, woo! Shireen Yates is the founder of the NEMA Sensor, and Jackie McEwan has the blog Gluten-Free, Follow Me. So we're going to be talking about all about navigating going gluten-free. Thank you guys again for being here tonight. So first, I'd like each of you to just tell us really quickly about why you ended up going gluten-free, how you found out, and what that transition was like at first.
Definitely. Do you want me to grab this? Yeah. Okay. So about 6.5 years ago, my sports doctor had all of his patients tested for food intolerances. And in my test results, gluten came up. And my first question was, what is gluten? I had never heard of it. When I found out what it was, I was even more overwhelmed. And that's how this all started. I was just doing research and trying to figure out what I could eat.
So I found out about 12 years ago in a period of my life where it's the worst time to cut out beer and pizza. So what period of life was that? College. Yeah, I was in college, a lot of stomach pains, had no idea what was going on, and I went to a lot of physicians and nutritionists and finally did an elimination diet and some tests. And they said, oh yeah, by the way, you can't eat gluten and dairy and egg and soy. So it was a big change.
And what was your first reaction? Did you grieve bread? Did you grieve beer?
Yes. I remember I actually walked into my shared housing with my girlfriends in college, and someone thought that someone had passed in the family. I was so upset. I was like, and they're like, no, I can't eat these things that I used to love because you're building this habit over your life of what you can eat, what you can, and suddenly you have to retrain everything. So it was very shocking. I was very upset.
So my final meal was quite the gluten meal. It was a massive pizza covered in mac and cheese. Oh, so I went big. I went big. And yeah, after that, I went completely gluten-free. It was really hard. But honestly, if I was going gluten-free right now, it's not that hard. There's so many options. There's so many substitutes. When I went gluten-free about 6 years ago, it was definitely challenging, but it was still easier than 10, 15 years ago. So it's just getting easier.
What were some of the surprises that you found when you started looking? Because obviously, you knew croissants, you knew bread, you knew pizza, mac and cheese, but I know there are some things that you would not assume are gluten-free or are not gluten-free. But
definitely. So one of the biggest things that I learned was soy sauce is not gluten-free. You have to have tamari sauce. And I definitely learned that the hard way because I was having stir fry every Sunday in college. And I stopped wanting it because I felt kind of nauseous sometimes. Didn't put it together till after I found out that I had to go gluten-free. But when you look back, a lot of things make sense. Another thing that is definitely key is cross-contamination. If you're having fries in a shared fryer with other gluten-free items, it's not safe. I would get really sick, so I always make sure to have a dedicated fryer because fries are actually gluten-free, but if you're dousing it with other gluten items, they're not going to be gluten-free.
Yeah, I think that the eating out was really challenging. It's what inspired me to start NEMA, which is this little device that allows you to actually test your food for gluten. And especially when eating out at restaurants, when you're trying to order these gluten-free menu items and the cross-contamination issue was a real thing, I was constantly getting exposed to gluten. About 1 out of 3 times that even people that we were talking to were saying, oh, I get sick 1 out of 3 times when I'm eating outside of the home. So fries are definitely one thing to watch out for. Pizzas as well, shared ovens. It's a big issue.
let's talk about your little sensor. Can you show us how it works? And tell us also, like, you know, really specifically how you use it. Do you just whip it out of your purse at the restaurant? Do you take it just like scanning things at the grocery store?
So the NEMA sensor comes with, this is the sensor, and then it comes with these disposable pods, which I don't have with me right now. But essentially, it's like a pregnancy test for food. So you take a sample of food, you put it in this little capsule, one-time use, and then you throw it in the sensor. And then in a few minutes, it says yes or no if that food contains gluten. We see most of our NEMA community using NEMA when they're eating outside of the restaurants. And yeah, whipping it out of the purse. We have a lot of people using it on airplanes, believe it or not, even when they're ordering gluten-free menu items on planes, and finding gluten about 1 out of 3 times when something's labeled gluten-free when they're eating outside of the home. For labeling, we've seen really pretty good labeling, in terms of packaged foods, and especially for Brandless. We've actually done a lot of testing for Brandless, and it's all been great.
That's good. And I was actually telling them earlier that when I ordered pizza at a place about 6 months ago, I was asked if my pizza had to be celiac friendly, totally safe. I said yes, obviously, so mine was good. And my husband, Brendan, ordered a pizza, and he didn't need for it to be totally safe. So I tested my pizza using this NEMA, came out perfect. And then we also tested Brendan's pizza, and it came back with traces of gluten, which goes to show you that when you're putting pizza in the oven without the extra tray, without the extra precautions, it's not safe. So that was really interesting for me to learn because, I already knew this, but it was great to know that NEMA definitely tests for that, because that's one of those things that's a little dicey.
That's awesome.
So you guys have talked about how you discovered that you had to go gluten-free years ago when obviously Brandless wasn't around. You hadn't invented the NEMA sensor. There wasn't your website. So Jackie, can you talk a little bit about when you started your website? What exactly were you trying to share with people? What were you trying to do?
So when I first became gluten-free, I just wanted one person to tell me everything that I needed to know. I wanted that tell-all guide that told me what I could eat, what I couldn't eat, and everything in between. And 6.5 years ago, that wasn't there. So I started doing my own research, and I started to develop this guide. Mostly just, I started off posting food photos on my Instagram, and I would talk to different people, and they wanted more. So then I was like, well, let me make a website where everything's already there, so I don't have to tell people everything over Instagram. And now the guide has over 2,000 gluten-free friendly restaurants, recipes, and brands. And you can also filter by everything. So if you wanted to find cookies, if you wanted to find tortillas, everything's very customizable. So you can also filter by different dietary restrictions. If you're following a gluten-free diet, you might also be nut-free, you might also be vegan, you might also be dairy-free. So you can filter by all of those things. And this is something that I always wanted when I first became gluten-free, so I'm just glad that I can now do that for other people.
Jackie's blog has actually been referenced many times by people that get NEMA, because a lot of times people just find out they're gluten-free and need the tools and the guidance. So it's an awesome resource. So really, gluten-free, follow her.
That's awesome. Nice plug. Yeah. I know there's a lot of misconceptions about being gluten-free. So can you talk about some of the things that you hear from wait staff and from friends of people who hear that you're gluten-free and ask you certain questions and make those assumptions?
I always get the follow-up question of, you order something gluten-free and when you're at a restaurant, and I would say 9 out of 10 times people say, well, are you really gluten-free? Are you how sick do you actually get? And I don't blame the waitstaff, because there's a lot of mixed signals. People are cutting gluten out because they think it's better and feel better, but they also are chugging down the beer. So there's mixed signals. And when you have to go in a restaurant and actually try to make that pizza gluten-free, it takes a lot of effort and operationally. So I think that just being an advocate for yourself, if you are cutting gluten out because your health really depends on it, you have to make that really clear, or just have a device that makes that really clear as well.
Definitely. For me, what I hear so many times is people assume that if you are gluten-free, that you're also very healthy. And that's not necessarily the case, because you can be eating so many processed foods, so much sugar. You can have gluten-free brownies and cookies and nachos, and mac and cheese pizza can now be done gluten-free. And that's not necessarily healthy. So if you are trying to be healthy, that would be more paleo, which is basically gluten-free without any processed foods. So yes, it's definitely healthier to not eat gluten, but that doesn't mean that you're being incredibly healthy.
I'd still like to touch on just because you bring up the healthy, but I mean, maybe not how much healthier are you, but how have you noticed your body sort of reacting now that you have cut out gluten?
So everyone has their own reaction. If I have gluten, it's very obvious because a few hours later I have to throw up. So that does not happen very often anymore. Yeah, very TMI, but that's the truth. And other people, you could be very bloated. You might have a rash on your face. You might just feel tired. You might feel foggy. It might be hard to get out of bed. You might not have good energy. So once you get rid of that gluten, you might feel a weight is lifted off of you. But really for the physical signs, I would say throwing up, looking like you're very bloated, and having something on your face or your skin.
Yeah, it's why it's a really hard thing to diagnose because there's over 200 symptoms associated with a gluten sensitivity or celiac disease. So it can make you feel awful in a lot of different ways. So it's hard.
So when someone first hears that they need to go gluten-free, or for whatever reason they decide to go gluten-free, what are the first 3 things that you would tell them to do?
First of all, I would say go to my site, glutenfreefollowme.com, because I did it for you. This is what I wanted when I first became gluten-free. So much easier to not have to go through all the products. Secondly, I would say read every label. You want to make sure that you're not seeing gluten, you're not seeing malt, you're not seeing barley. Those are key words. And thirdly, I would just make sure that you're able to take it in and just make sure that you're your biggest advocate. When you're eating out, if you don't feel comfortable because the waiter isn't making you feel good about the food, don't eat it. Bring snacks.
I would say check out Jackie's blog for sure for all those resources. And go to nemasensor.com, check out the product, see if it's a good fit for you to help navigate that sneaky gluten. And also check out the products at Brandless to just do that pantry replacement, because the pantry there's a lot of hidden gluten in your pantry. And if you really want to be diligent, just read every label and go to Brandless and replace stuff that might have gluten in your pantry.
Can I say one thing? Yeah. So something that I love about Brandless is that you can filter by gluten-free. So that's super key. Rather than having to click on every item and go, is this gluten-free? Is it not? You can just filter by it. And as you know, I like having to filter. So if I can filter on a brand site and find all the gluten-free items, it's so much easier.
And you guys have talked a little bit about the communities that you've found since going gluten-free, and I know you have sort of created one, and I feel like you probably also created one with your product. Can you guys talk to a little bit about the communities that have sprung up around you that you've discovered since making this transition?
There's a lot of great micro communities as it relates to gluten because it's very communal where you're eating. It's usually localized, and that's what we found when we first started. And at NEMA, we're very big on our own community, but you can actually see what other people are testing with the device on the NEMA app. So it's a great way to give you that instant sense of community if you're in a city and you're trying out different restaurants, and you can see what other people are testing products as well as restaurants. So it's my favorite community.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. For me, it was definitely Instagram and social media. No one else in my family or close friends is also following some sort of diet like this. So I was really trying to reach out to other people. And some of my best friends now are people that I found via Instagram. If you had told me this 10 years ago, I would have thought that was really sketchy. But you really get to know people, and it just becomes that safe haven for you.
Has going gluten-free changed your diet in other ways that you weren't expecting? Because I did have a friend who discovered she had celiac disease. She'd been a vegetarian, and when she learned that she could no longer have gluten, she actually started eating meat again so she would have more options. But I wondered if maybe that it's inspired you to change your eating habits in different ways.
It's definitely inspired me to cook more and be more thoughtful and deliberate about what I was putting in my body. And, I eat out less, and I'm very focused on the ingredients in packaged foods. And I think just that focus on ingredients, I go beyond gluten now. I'm like, how much sodium's in here? I'm reading the label, how much sugar's in here? So just made me more deliberate about how I'm nourishing myself.
So before going gluten-free, I definitely ate a lot of bread. but I would say I wasn't a huge pizza person. And when I was told that I couldn't have pizza, that's when I wanted it. It's so weird. So when I was told, oh, well, you can't have this croissant, I'm like, okay, I need to find some sort of gluten-free croissant because now I really want it. I feel like you want what you can't have. And I was trying to figure out different substitutes, and I feel like that happens a lot in the first year or 2 years when you're going gluten-free, and you might eat more processed things because you're just trying to figure it out. So now I would say that I don't eat processed foods all day, but I'm able to find healthier options, and I'm able to also treat myself and have those processed foods, but I now know more about them.
Any other questions from the group? Oh, go ahead.
If you do want to be really careful, there are a bunch of 100% gluten-free restaurants. So on my site, you can also filter by that. So if you don't feel comfortable eating out at a place that has shared dishes, shared fryers, I have 55 places that I've been to in New York, LA, different cities that are completely gluten-free. So down to everything, it's completely gluten-free. So some people, if they have celiac, they only feel comfortable eating out at those places, and that's totally up to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks, Shireen and Jackie. Thanks, you guys. And feel free to hang out and mingle before you go. And if you have questions for them, I'll be around.